learn that the hard way. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Scott Barnwell. I work with the city of Asheville, North Carolina, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and specifically work with the business and public technology team within IT. And I'm here today to share with you a little story of a journey that we've been on for about a little over a year, well, really several years, but actively on this journey in terms of using cloud with DR for just over a year. So, and we're still on that journey, but we've made some pretty good progress. And I was just going to share with you where we've been, where we are, and where we're going next. So, I think it's a pretty hopeful story. So, before we get started, let's talk for a second about DR in general and how we approach disaster recovery. There was a study that was done, I think it was about 450 IT professionals who were asked their level of confidence in their ability to bring back up systems that had gone down, right? And this was done by Information Week. Anyone want to throw out a guess as to what percent of IT professionals are confident that they could get critical systems back up and running in a reasonable time period? And that time period is not defined. 20%. 40. 10. This is pretty good. It's 23%. But what that says is 77% of IT professionals are not confident that they can get their systems back up and running quickly. And that's a little bit scary. And another 45% of these same people said that they test their disaster recovery systems in terms of backup and restore at least. They test those systems, quote unquote, once in a while. That's 45%. Most do little to no testing. So it's a pretty scary environment when you think about it. I think many of us are the reality of disaster recovery is cross your fingers, please don't break, please don't break, please don't break. That's a pretty common system that's out there for many things that we do. So and there's a good reason for it, right? Because disaster recovery, there's the current state of it, at least traditional DR, isn't great. It's really expensive. There's high costs up front. There's capital costs, there's hardware costs, software costs. There's very little return on investment. It's the kind of thing you spend all this money for, and you hope really never to use it except in a test situation, right? So you've got all this infrastructure, perhaps in a different data center that you've invested in, or maybe you've outsourced it, and even that's expensive. And you're hoping not to use it. So there's very little return on that investment. There's little to no automation, so it's largely a manual process that you have to go through to actually bring systems back up. And doing this in terms of remote geography is really tough as well. And that's one of the things that you like to do. You don't typically want to have your DR center very close to your primary data center for obvious reasons in case of a big disaster. But doing this in a geographically remote way has been traditionally very tough. And I would challenge you all to ask, if you're using a DR provider, ask them to do a failover for you. Maybe you've done that, hopefully you have, but ask them to do that and see what the response is. Because I know when we were doing some investigation, and we talked to some vendors that provided DR services, and we said, well, okay, great, so if we make this big investment and use your service, we can call you up anytime, right? And we can fail over our systems, and that's not a problem. And there was silence. And I said, well, no, give us a week, and we got to schedule this stuff, and then we can do it for you. That's not really how the real world works in terms of real disasters. So it's important to ask those questions, but the current state isn't real pretty. Now, in terms of in Asheville, this is just an image of the city of Asheville, and City Hall's up here at the top, and our Public Works building is at the bottom. They're a couple blocks apart. But in terms of Asheville, some of you might know our CIO, Jonathan Feldman. He started the city about 10 years ago. When he got there, he said, so what's our disaster recovery plan? What do we do? And the infrastructure team said, oh, we've got a DR center. And he said, great, that's awesome. Where is it? And they said, oh, it's 2 blocks away at the Public Works building, which isn't so great. I mean, it's better than nothing, but it's clearly if there was a major catastrophe, a regional power outage, perhaps a tornado, We had major impacts from Hurricane Katrina a number of years ago with massive flooding. It's conceivable that both data centers could go down and then you're stuck, you have nothing left, right? So this is not ideal. In addition, we had no, had no type of automation. We were only able to, and I think this is typical of many DR systems, is only really looked at our most critical systems. There were a lot of other important software systems that we weren't really even addressing. And the RTO on this, the recovery time objective, was about 12 hours. So we could easily lose up to a whole day's worth of data, even if we had the DR center working properly 2 blocks away. So it was far from ideal. I mean, DR excellence in this situation is a major challenge for many reasons. So, so to get around that, well, we started looking at, okay, what are our options? And so the first plan was, and this goes back to the late 2000s, we started planning for a big capital project. It was going to cost about $200,000, and we were going to build a new DR center about 15 miles away near our airport. It was going to be built in conjunction with a new fire department. We thought, well, we'll just do a little annex to this new fire department. We'll put our DR center there. It's far enough away. Everything should be great. So we started planning for it. It wasn't funded. We started planning for it, trying to make the case for why that should be funded. And then come 2000, it actually ultimately was in the plan. And several years passed, and we were working towards this, and the plan was for this fire department to start being built in about 2011. Well, as you all know, the economy wasn't great at that time. Revenues were down, expenses were up, and so that fire department project got canceled. So there goes our DR center that we had planned. Our great plan is now gone. And we're sort of stuck with, okay, what do we do now? And do we see this as a big problem, or do we see this as an opportunity? And around the same time, 2011, people were just starting to talk about cloud computing. But the view from within, at least a lot of folks in IT, at least in the city of Asheville and our infrastructure team in particular, the cloud was something that looked more like this, right? It was something to be afraid of. It was something that was unknown. And I think those were natural reactions, right? It's natural to be fearful of the unknown, and I think there was also some turf questions and also just job security. You know, what was going to happen if all the infrastructure was to leave and be hosted on Amazon, for example? Why would we need data centers, and why would we need the people to run those? And it brings up a quote from Upton Sinclair. It says, it's difficult to get someone to understand something when their salary depends on them not understanding it, right? So there's sort of a built-in motivation not to want to be excited about making major changes. But with that, we started talking about it, at least, having conversations. And again, our CIO is pretty forward-thinking and always wanting to sort of push the envelope in terms of what we do and looking for new and better solutions. And in that same year, in 2011, we hosted an event called Cloud Day. It wasn't a very exciting name, but anyways, it was a one-day conference in Asheville, and we invited the business community to come in. A number of tech firms came in that were working with cloud computing, just to talk about their experiences, what was working, what wasn't working, and also just to educate ourselves. I don't know how many of you remember 2011, 3 years ago, there was not too many people who really had a good concept of what cloud computing even was at that time. It wasn't that long ago, but it's really come a long way. It's just in a short period of time. And just kind of overcoming those fears of the unknown and looking at the possibilities. And we realized, well, if we're going to move forward, we've really got to build a business case around this. So, and it's got to encompass many things. I mean, one obvious thing is security. That's if you all were in this session, in this room earlier, listening to the agent from the FBI, there's very valid reasons to be concerned about security, and we have to take those into concern. But there's also other components that we have to consider, like cost, capital versus operating cost, the level of automation, this whole idea of geodiversity, like can we have a DR center that's far enough away that a regional, a major disaster won't take out both our primary data center and our DR center. And so when we put all that together and we made this case, cloud computing looked really awesome. It looked like a great use case for this because, again, with the cloud, and we're talking AWS here, you're paying for what you need. You pay as you go, right? Everybody knows that. And with a DR scenario, if if you're going to build that big capital DR center, this new data center, you're essentially going to spend a whole ton of money on equipment, on software, on a facility, and everything that goes with it to maintain it. And you just hope it sits there. And you really don't want it to actually do anything except occasionally test, right? I mean, you want to be able to test, you want to be able to make sure things work. But other than that, all that infrastructure is getting very, very little utilization. And that's where the cloud, that's where the business case for the cloud really ramps up. We've done some testing and we've been exploring using cloud for other things. And we actually threw up a production app in Amazon, ran it for about 6 months, and we took it back down. We realized it doesn't make any sense. It was an app that had to run 24/7. The cost was prohibitive. It was a good experiment. We learned that. We learned that wasn't a good use case. But going back to the DR situation, it seemed like an excellent use case. In that most of that infrastructure is sitting there, and why not just rent out the little bit you need when you need it, and then not pay for it all the rest of the time. So that was, it seemed like a compelling case, but how do we get there? So around that same time, we happened to get pitched by a startup out in Silicon Valley. And it was a company called Cloud Velocity. They're actually, their name is now Cloud Velox, V-E-L-O-X. But Cloud Velocity pitched the city and said, hey, we've got this awesome new technology that can allow us to automate your disaster recovery in AWS, and you pay as you go. You don't have to pay for all that infrastructure. You don't have to build a new DR center. And we can do this for whatever apps you want to do it for. We can get this set up for you. So it was a pretty compelling case, and the folks that started that company had pretty amazing resumes. So we had confidence. It was certainly a risk, but it was a measured risk. The cost was not unreasonable. We could get out of it any time, and really, we didn't have a good plan B because our DR center had been canceled. We still had the disaster recovery 2 blocks away, but we wanted something better than that. And so we started working with Cloud Velocity, and this started actually working with them and once we got through contracting and everything, I would say the project really got down to nuts and bolts in January of this year. So we've been at this for about 11 months. And we were very methodical about it and said, okay, let's start small and do this incrementally and actually prove that we can do it. So we started with this idea of a proof of concept. And we decided in order to do this, well, I should back up and say the end game for us is our ERP system. We use Tyler Lewis. That's the most critical system for running the city. All of our financials are in there. We got to be able to make payroll. The most critical systems in the city are based on the ERP. So we were not going to use that as our test case, right, for obvious reasons. But we thought if we could take a couple of other systems and prove those, then maybe we could get our ERP in the cloud in terms of DR. And so what we did, we chose two systems. We chose a point of sale application that is used at our Civic Center for selling concessions and so on at the Civic Center during events. And we also use our asset management system that is it's used for tracking work orders and maintenance and just managing assets for water utility. And so we chose those two to start out with, actually do this proof of concept. And knowing that we could fail and that would be okay, but we were going to learn in the process. And this is all about trying something new and innovative and ultimately something that could end up saving us a lot of money. And so that's where we started. And you can see the need for the DRs. Just like in the case of the point of sale app, if there was an outage, they would not be able to do sales. And this actually happened earlier this year. The system went down. This was back in, I think, March. And Harlem Globetrotters had come to Asheville, and we got a call, oh no, the point of sale system is down, we're not going to be able to sell concessions. And they were literally going to lose about $20,000 of revenue just in that one event. We were able to get it back up, fortunately. This is before this project was complete. But it just showed that it's not even just about disaster recovery, it's also just business continuity. Because had it truly gone down, we could have failed over to the cloud, and we actually could today with that point of sale app. But it seemed like a good use case to look at it, and realizing that there's value that goes beyond just the true disaster recovery scenarios. Okay, so moving forward, we started to work on this project. And this is how it works, basically. We work with Cloud Velox. They come in, they discover the host, they map out all the dependencies, they provision everything in AWS. They essentially create a mirrored system of our production system in our primary data center in Amazon. And then there's a process of replication and synchronization of all the hosts. And then we use this concept of pilot light. And I'll explain that more in detail in just a few moments. But essentially, there's several different architectures possible for disaster recovery within AWS. Everything from what's called a multi-site architecture, where you have your entire production system running in AWS in parallel to your primary system. That gets very cost prohibitive, at least for our use case. It didn't make any sense because you're paying as you go, and in that case, the meter's ticking 24/7. The pilot light is another option where essentially you keep. Well, let me run forward here and I'll explain this in more detail. But ultimately, once this is all done, we can then fail over and just launch the instances that are required to run that app in AWS. So again, we've got both systems mirrored, and Cloud VLOX, their software, essentially just creates the connection and maintains the replication between the two systems. And yeah, fairly straightforward, just the architecture of how this is set up. All right, so the idea of this pilot light, again, is you've got your primary site here on the bottom, disaster recovery at the top, and there's database synchronization going on. So once you do the initial, once everything's been replicated in AWS, you basically keep this small instance of your database server running in AWS. And you're just feeding the deltas from your database. So it's just capturing the deltas, and it's just sitting there ready in this pilot light phase, like your furnace is sitting there with the pilot light on, ready to flare up as soon as it's needed, but you're only paying for that little tiny flame when you don't actually need to heat your house, right? And then when things get real cold and the storm comes in and the thing kicks in and warms up your place, well, your heating bill goes up as it should. But what we've done here is we've got these AMIs set up for all the different servers that are required for this application, and they're just sort of sitting there in the background. They're not running, so they're not paying anything for that. And the cost on this ends up being really small. When even the highest cost month we've had to date, which I think was the month of May, when we were doing significant testing of actually rolling this out, I think the bill was $500 or $600 from AWS. That was it. Usually it's next to nothing, and the only time we're paying is when we're actually doing testing. So this is what our system looks like right now, with both the point of sale application and our asset management system. Everything's running on our data center, but everything's set up to run in AWS in the event that it's needed or for testing. And then in the case that you do need to do that, you essentially ignite that. You create instances from these AMIs that are sitting there in Amazon, and then that's when you actually start paying, right? So you start paying as you go and sort of as you need it. And the beauty of this is that it's automated. It's literally, I mean, it sounds crazy, but it's literally one click once everything's set up. There's a failover button, you fail over, and everything lights up and starts running. All right, so again, the biggest, there's, I guess, two things that are really exciting about this. One, you see that little dashed line between your primary site and your disaster recovery site. So for us, that dashed line used to represent two physical blocks in space. Now, we're in the AWS West region, so we're literally, this is running across the country, right? And then the question came up, what about performance? This might be a real problem. Can it actually run? And the beauty of AWS is you can scale these servers. You can apply whatever resources you need. You don't have to, like some traditional DR systems might only run at like 50% of your primary systems because they're just not needed that much. With AWS, you can run these things with whatever resources you want. And it was very exciting to hear from our system admin for that asset management system, because we had him go in and actually test the thing in AWS. And his report back to us was that the performance was as good or possibly even better than the site that we have locally. So it took away the concerns about performance. We've had actually no issues at all in terms of performance. But the pay-as-you-go is what's really awesome. So this is just kind of an idea to show you what this looks like when we talk about pay-as-you-go. So the AWS cost stays really low, and it just spikes when you use it. So when you turn on those AMIs, when you actually create those instances, those servers start running, that's when the cost goes up. But you can turn it back off again. You're in control of it. You turn them on, turn them off as you need. And whereas before, it was so painful, to be honest, to do testing like a backup and restore. It was manual, it took time, it always got pushed off because there were just other priorities, other fires to put out. Now, we've actually got a quarterly schedule where we just do testing on a quarterly basis. That's just kind of our standard operating procedures now. We can test all the systems as they go into this on a quarterly basis. And if we did have a true disaster and had to fail over, that thing can run as long as you need it to. And it's possible it might cost more than having that data center that we were going to build for a short period of time. But during most of the lifespan of this, the cost equation is just, there's no question about it. It's a win-win. It provides a whole lot more agility. Again, the geographic diversity question is solved. We no longer have to worry about some major regional disaster or power outage. We can run this thing in the cloud, and it's going to be running in a different part of the country. We can choose where that's going to be. And I think another really important business driver for this is we can start to look at other apps. Like, we can protect more than we ever would have. So we may never have taken that point of sale system, or maybe even an asset management system, and done something like that with another data center due to cost. We can now look at what we would call important but not critical apps and start looking at protecting those. And the RTO now is at most about 2 hours to be back up and running. So the chance of losing data goes way, way down in terms of there's just very little time lag, and actually often it's much faster than that.
It's kind of bandwidth,
So bandwidth is, yeah, that's a really good question. We're fortunate in Asheville that we have multiple bandwidth providers, and it's relatively inexpensive. So that is a concern, and that's not going to be the case everywhere. So we realize that. And our bandwidth usage did go up significantly with the database synchronization going on. So I think at first we're looking at ways to mitigate that. Some of it was I know there were some log files that were getting written that were huge, and that was causing us. We're trying to go in and sort of fine tune that now and I guess reduce as much as possible that extra bandwidth. But that is definitely a concern. Good question. So again, a lot of this, at least getting started, we're still early in this. Like I said, we really started building this out in January. Just last week, we did the full replication of our ERP into the cloud. So, and we started to test it, and it failed, and we expected that. There's just a lot of dependencies and moving parts that have to be worked out. So there's definitely a lot of work on the front end to get everything set up to work properly. But I would expect in the next month we'll have that up and running. We'll get all the issues worked out, and we also, I should say, with each of these systems, we go to the system owners and we have a conversation with them, explaining, particularly with the ERP, before we ever did that synchronization into the cloud. We sat down with our internal auditors, our finance director, and we talked about the security that's available in AWS, which is significant. And there's multiple levels of security with these virtual private clouds and encrypted storage. And another important piece of this too, I think critical piece of this, was we didn't just say that, right? So when we went to sit down with our finance director, we didn't just say, oh, it'll be secure, don't worry about it. We hired a third-party outside security auditor to come in and actually test this thing and really put it to the test. And they found a few issues. Almost all of them were on our side, on our internal security, just recommendations for improvements. There was nothing dealing specifically with Amazon. Their security was, I think it's fair to say, is much more robust than anything we could ever produce. So, but we were able to get the buy-in from those departments. So the finance department, the civic center, the water department, they were all on board from the beginning and understood what was going on. And they're definitely stakeholders in the whole process. And they understand the benefits that they're going to get out of this, right? First, especially finance, because they're recognizing that we no longer are going to be looking to budget a $200,000 data center. So that's a big deal, because cost is always a huge concern with finance, as it should be. So they've become actually a big supporter and are pushing us forward. So we still have that fear factor I talked about earlier, and it's important to overcome that in a project like this. And in doing that, I think the key steps are starting small. that allows people to get comfortable with things that the risk of failure is there, but it's not real high. Nobody's gonna lose their job over this. Nobody's gonna, there's not, we expect there to be some failures. We expect to learn a lot, which we have. And if at the end of the day, if this whole project had been a failure, we really wouldn't have lost that much. I mean, it was a fairly minimal investment in both the software provider, Cloud Vlogs, as well as our own staff, to go down this road. But we've learned a ton in the process, and now we're confident that we've made a really good choice. I should say this is not the panacea for disaster recovery. We will still have a local disaster recovery center, but it can be a much smaller footprint. Things like VoIP and our public safety radios, that will all stay local. But there are these other apps that will make a lot of sense, and I think most importantly will allow us to do ongoing testing and actually confirm that we are protected. But I think it's important, in addition to all the security and the auditing that goes on with that, to just be fact-based about it, right? So when we built our business case, we were very fact-based about, here's our situation now, here's where we could go, and don't dwell on the fear so much as the facts of the situation. And I think I have to give a lot of credit to our CIO again, Jonathan Feldman. He's constantly pushing us to not just do things the way they've always been done or the way that everybody else does them. I give him a lot of credit as just a leader in this industry. He's constantly pushing us, and the term he uses is he likes to seek out inspirational work, things that get people excited to come to work, excited to participate, finding value in what you're doing, finding meaning in what you're doing. I think this kind of project is what does that. And one manifestation of that, we were really fortunate back in June, is that Amazon chose the city of Asheville as the quote-unquote city on the cloud. It was a international competition award, and we beat out cities that were 4 or 5 times our size. And it was based around this project, the fact that we were adopting cloud technology and had a really strong business case to go with it. And that award, also, the really nice thing is it came with $50,000 worth of AWS credits. So essentially, all the testing and all of the implementation we're doing this year in terms of Amazon, we have no bill, it's all paid for. So that was a nice sort of extra, and I think with all of that, it really helps to bring along the infrastructure folks who were nervous and fearful about this. I don't think I mentioned this before, but one strategic decision we made early on was to let the apps team lead this project, right? Because historically, the infrastructure folks have been the ones dealing with disaster recovery, but in this case, it was the apps team, and they really had a lot of skin in the game because when systems would fail or go down, they're the ones that had to deal with all the work orders that would come in terms of getting those operational again. And it wasn't so much just being able to, like the definition of success historically may have been, well, if we can get the system up to a login screen, that's successful. With the apps team being on this, they would take it the next step and actually do really deep testing of those apps and log in and make sure everything worked with it. And that was a key piece of this as well. So some lessons learned. I didn't mention bandwidth, but I would add bandwidth to this. Just be aware that you may have some increased bandwidth usage or needs. But the deep testing of the apps, that's critical because we have definitely found issues and problems that we've had to deal with. But like I said, we've worked through those and we're working through them right now with our ERP. And I think the theme behind most of this is do all this on the front end, learn all the errors and issues and problems you're having so you can fix them before you actually have a disaster you're dealing with, so you feel prepared. One was don't take license keys for granted. There's a lot of proprietary software vendors that have license keys for a good reason, and those license keys are tied to a host ID, and if that changes, the software won't work. And so we discovered that really early on with our point of sale application. And we had an excellent vendor. We called them up, and they worked us through the process to make that work in a disaster recovery situation. But again, we learned that on the front end. We didn't wait for a disaster to happen to try to launch these applications and realize that they're not going to work. And to do this, we were also very careful because we assumed that City Hall is gone in a recovery situation, right? You sort of assume the worst. You assume like City Hall just doesn't exist anymore. Your data center is completely gone. And so we would access everything in terms of testing from the public internet. That was key piece of this as well. And that gets to internal versus external DNS. You just have to be aware that applications which you may have considered internal, within some imaginary perimeter, there's advantage to perhaps thinking of those as external and going with like a globally distributed DNS. We found that was an issue as well, and started moving towards globally distributed DNS for that reason. So for even for things that are quote unquote internal apps. We also just found some problems, like we discovered in one of our verticals the passwords were being passed as plain text over HTTP. We didn't even realize that until we started testing. Discovered that and fixed that as well. So with our proof of concept complete at this point, both of those initial systems are up and running. We can fail over. We're on a quarterly schedule to do that. We're now moving to what we call our critical systems, and that's the ERP. So hopefully in the next month or two, we'll have some success to report back and have our ERP up in the cloud available, and we'll be able to test that, truly test it, I would say for the first time in a situation like this. So, any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
The cloud blocks that you use in conjunction with AWS.
Right.
Why take a look at just going directly to AWS? What's value added to these?
So the value, that's a great question. So the value of cloud blocks, their software automates the whole process. So you have, and I didn't put up any pictures of what that looks like, but you essentially have a dashboard, and you can see your local system, you can see the system in AWS and how it's all provisioned, and what the status of everything is, and then you can fail over via their dashboard. So all that automation, they set all that up, and it's all handled through their software. So that's the value added. Yes?
You mentioned you push one button to make it fail over.
Right.
Tornado blows your primary data center away.
Right.
Somebody in IT remotely has got to go in and push that button on the dashboard, or is it going to automatically say, hey, things are down, let's start running it through the remote?
No, at this point, it's someone's got to actually start it remotely. As long as so you have to have internet access. I mean, that is a requirement. So if you have no internet for hundreds of miles around, that yeah.
So the process is automated with a manual kickoff.
That's right. That's right. I mean, that's a good question, and I haven't even.
Well, if they're trying to sell stuff at the arena,
right,
and something goes haywire,
right,
they still got to wait for somebody in IT to know there's a problem and to log in and push the button.
Yeah, or they most likely they would call and someone they would contact the help desk and someone would realize what's going on and launch it. Yeah, but you're right. At this point, it is a manual step to actually launch all those instances and fail over to AWS. Good point.
Can you do that through Zillow?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. Yes.
Scott, are there other vendors out there like Cloud Velocity that you guys look at?
They're really, when we got started, I don't know what the current scene looks like, but when we got started, like I said, they were a startup. They didn't have many customers. We were an early test case, which we benefited from too in terms of the cost was much reduced for us to go into this. But as far as I know, there's nothing exactly like this. Now, we have started looking at, some options. We're always looking at options, but like Microsoft Azure, I think there's some possibilities there that might approach this. But at least when we got started, they were fairly cutting edge in the industry. And their folks came from, I think their CTO came, I might get this wrong, one of their principals came from RightScale and just had really deep knowledge in cloud computing and in automation. And so that's kind of their background. And again, the resumes of their team were just so impressive. I think that's what encouraged our CIO to take that leap of faith and take the risk to do it.
The amount of data that you're looking at right now, it goes, we also run Maximum as a portion application. Only you can see the database address completely separate from the ERP system.
Right.
It's a substantial amount of data.
It is, yeah.
What do you think, and y'all really started forecasting what that's going to look like in terms of the bandwidth and what that cost is going to be?
We're so early with that, we don't really have a good sense of it yet, and how we're gonna be able to, I guess, streamline that as much as possible and minimize that bandwidth. But the bandwidth question is a very valid one, and there's, I think we're fortunate. I don't know, in more rural areas, it might be more difficult, but in Asheville anyways, we've got several competitors. I'm sorry?
How much, like,
I don't really know. I'm not sure. I know we've got several providers coming through Asheville. There's been talk of, I'm forgetting, I don't want to throw a number out there because I'm not probably going to. We just have one primary event back.
Look, I kind of bring it up, and I've been in several of these VR cloud meetings that's going on.
Yeah.
I've been looking at it for a while. I said, last week, the hosting fee wasn't that substantial.
Right.
For the resources utilized, that makes sense. The problem that we have is that, where our current VR site is local.
Right.
We've got a 10 gig link between.
Yep.
And we're doing, same reputation, and considerable amount of data.
Yeah.
We started looking at just trying to do a gig link between here and the VR facility. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Per month.
Yeah.
And that was the cost, really, that for us.
Right.
And so, I don't know if maybe these applications do something with the data that, reduces the size of it, or if it's.
Well, I know we have reduced it with Maximo. Initially, the bandwidth requirements were much greater, and we've been working on that and actually bringing it down with PoppyLock. So I know there are some ways of streamlining that, but at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of data being passed. And I mean, one of the things that by doing that initial replication and then just doing feeding the deltas, and after that, it's a lot smaller on an ongoing basis, but still, it's significant.
The initial replication or the initial sync, even with your broadband, how long generally?
That took us, we just did it last week. I think we were done within a couple of days for the ERP.
General size?
Well, I'm sorry, I don't have it. I don't know the size, but it's large. We've got a pretty big pipe in it. Like I said, it was over a couple of days that we did that whole process.
Last question is, any consideration for public safety, like CAD systems and things like that, so you just compliance, which I would consider to be a mission critical system, but
Yeah.
just wonder if there's any conversation in that space.
We haven't approached that yet, although, we did sit down with our CGIS folks, at least Asheville, Buncombe County, about using cloud for another, completely unrelated to this, for some document management tools. And we were given a blessing on that. They were okay with that, so. But as far as disaster recovery, yeah, we don't really manage that in the city directly, so it hasn't been a priority for us. But it's a fair question. I consider that fairly critical as well. Yeah.
Is this just web-based apps, or?
Yeah, it's just web-based.
So if you have a client, you wouldn't be able to connect into it. So if you have like a client, then you need to be connected to it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. No. This is where I'm a GIS guy by background. This is where my infrastructure knowledge gets a little weak. But like with Maximo, no, I don't think it is just the web. I mean, it's all run through the web, but it's not just web-based clients, is my understanding. You can actually, you might know better from the Maximo standpoint.
We're doing all our super browser.
Yeah.
But,
I think more, and actually, now that I think about it, I think most of ours is in the browser too, as is most everything we're doing with Munis as well. So, yeah, that's a good question. I guess everything we've done to date has been browser based. So, all right, yeah.
The database replication that you mentioned, or the, moving over the deltas, are you talking about the actual application database, or is there a database that sort of comprises all of the configuration through your cloud velocity?
No, this is the actual application database.
Actual application.
Yeah.
Do you know what technology, I saw SQL Server 2008, is that log shipping or database mirroring, or do you know?
I know it's done at the block level, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. All right. I think we finished a few minutes early. Thanks, appreciate it.